Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kim Woodworth, and I'm sorry, I have to juggle here. My name is Kim Woodworth. I am on the board of directors for Colorado Companies to Watch. I chair the program committee and am residing on the virtual programming committee, which work to bring today's webinar to you all. And as my hobby, when Aaron, Toby, and Jill have nothing for me to do, I am the operations director for the Economic Development Council of Colorado, a statewide nonprofit industry association supporting economic development efforts across the state of Colorado. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. I'm sure you've all heard this before. You have all entered into the webinar on mute. We encourage you all to ask questions from our presenters today. You can type them into the chat section at the bottom of your screen. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation. We will follow up after today's webinar with a link to the webinar recording. We will also post it on CCTW's Click channel, which we will highlight in a moment. Along with the link will be a short 2-minute survey that we're asking everyone to participate in to help us continue bringing great content to our community. Colorado Companies to Watch programming and events are made possible by our 2020 sponsors, who are deeply committed to a robust, civically engaged business ecosystem in Colorado. Without their support, CCTW would not be able to celebrate the achievement our second stage companies have made to provide the necessary resources, tools, and community to support their continued trajectory. Earlier this year, the board of directors and program management were engaged in discussions on the importance of value of bringing our community of winners, alumni, sponsors, and community partners together in an exclusive online platform to encourage collaboration of shared knowledge and connectivity. In the current situation has accelerated our discussions into action. Something of this magnitude takes months to a year to assemble, and I am proud to announce that through the hard, exhaustive work of a number of board members and program management, CCTW is launching a communications hub for our community to connect by using Zoho's virtual communications platform called Click. Today's webinar is CCTW's first virtual event kicking off our virtual series, which will be shared on this platform along with state and local resources, organizational and workforce tools, and much more. We encourage all our membership to join the CCTW Click community and to engage with the content channels that will be populated with timely and pertinent topics. Later in 2020, the CCTW Click community will be enhanced with a robust analytics capability to further alumni connectivity, collaboration, and advancement. We welcome several guests here today who are getting acquainted with our community. We hope that today's event inspires you to join our community either through the nominations process or sponsorship, so you too can join this elite community of leaders. Without further ado, I would like to move on to today's webinar, as it is top of mind with everyone, navigating reentry. We're experiencing significant changes in the way we do business. As leaders, access to tools and accurate information will aid in setting up your company to thrive when navigating this difficult landscape. We ask our panel of experts to share their thoughts and insights on how to be effective in remote working environments. What is the impact of COVID-19 on M&A markets, liquidity, valuations, and specific industries? And finally, we will hear perspectives from the healthcare industry on distancing guidelines, testing, and vaccine timelines. So I would like, Brian, I would like to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Hello everyone, I'm Brian Taylor, Velocity Global. Just for a little background, our organizations work with companies looking to expand internationally. And that's without the use of entity setup or use of non-compliant contractors. So it'll be important to understand a little bit of that as I'll be speaking through the view of our clients and what they're doing in today's marketplace in the midst of coming out of this COVID-19 or work from home initiatives. As you can see, Bill Mack of Forbes M&A and Heather Potters of PharmaJet are on the conference as well. And I'll allow each of them to say a quick hello and introduce themselves. Bill, if you wouldn't mind making an introduction first.
Yep, Absolutely. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, thanks for having me here. Appreciate all the work you put into this, Kim. Yeah, I'm Bill Knack, Forbes M&A Group. We are a Colorado-based M&A advisory firm. We work nationally and from time to time internationally. We have offices in Denver. I happen to be here in Boulder, Colorado, and we also have an office in Salt Lake City. So we do, most of the work we do is sell-side advisory. So we help business owners, closely held businesses sell their business, sell their company when they're ready to exit for whatever reason. There's also a side of our practice that is in capital formation. It's a pretty big component of what we do, and capital formation is essentially raising debt or equity from an alternative debt provider and sometimes a commercial lender. So we're hired to help with the debt side of businesses. And then in addition to that, we do buy-side work and also special situation type work. Transaction sizes are in the 10 million to on the low side up to 200, 250 million on the high side. Meat of the bell curve for transactions and deals, I would say, is in that $40 million to $80 million range size. And we work in everything from healthcare, including home health, biotech, consumer products. We've got a very strong business services practice, tech-enabled services, SaaS, very robust ad tech group. And I've been at Forbes now for about 8 years, and started out my career as an entrepreneur, and started my first company when I was 23, and sold it to a private equity group when I was 28, and from there went on to start or buy and then ultimately sell a number of other companies. So my background is more entrepreneurial, but now I'm in the advisory side, and we on a weekly basis, we're between myself and the other members of my team, we're speaking to dozens and dozens of institutional investors and debt providers. And so we have a pretty interesting and very real-time perspective of how Wall Street and private equity and institutional investors are thinking about deploying capital. And it's quite a bit different than it was just, as you can imagine, 8-10 weeks ago. It's not all bad, and I'll get into that a little bit later.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Heather, do you mind making the introduction?
You bet. It's my pleasure. I am the co-founder of PharmaJet, which is a needle-free jet injection technology. We focus on immunizations. And historically, I have a private equity background, and from time to time, I sit on boards and sometimes invest in small companies. But my day job really is PharmaJet. And kind of the interesting thing is that now that we're in this unique setting of a pandemic, now is our time, and that we're focused on immunization, and we are absolutely planning to be part of a coronavirus solution. We have some strategic pillars that we have historically focused on, which include not only standard depth and dose for immunizations, but we've been able to prove that we can functionally reduce the dose by moving from the muscle to the skin and get a better immune response. So stretching the dose of the vaccine supply involves things like the polio eradication initiative globally. We've also been part of federal markets activities where we have a number of collaborations with 8 US government agencies. And we're finding that the pandemic preparedness activities are moving from influenza now to coronavirus. We're up to 14 coronavirus candidates today across multiple geographies in the world, mostly the smaller and mid-sized pharma partners, but we also may be bolted on to candidates that reach a proof of concept stage so that we can be helpful, because we've discovered that either we can stretch the dose and we eliminate waste and get more out of the vials, or we might be able to reduce the dose by moving from the muscle to the skin. And it turns out there's a whole bunch of people, about 15% of the human population, that will never show up and take a needle injection. And we tend to see somewhere between 5 and 18% additional participation because we get rid of needles. And then push and click, anybody can give an injection. And then I guess the last thing is that we've been able to discover over time that we can make certain injectables work better. So that falls into the nucleic acid space, which would be DNA and messenger RNA vaccines, where the evidence around PharmaJet, and we've been part of 67 human clinical studies so far, suggests that we're several-fold better in immune response than needle-based delivery. So potentially, we enable things to come to market that might not otherwise. And in that area specifically, it tends to be rapid development of candidates to progress them into human testing, which today is absolutely invaluable for coronavirus. So while we are stretched in an exciting way, we also are mindful that the world's a big place and there's a long way to go with trying to ramp up additional capacity, raising more money that we never thought we would need to raise, at least for our more recent business plan. But it's exciting times for us.
Fantastic. Thank you both. To add a little more color on myself, again, I'm Brian Taylor. I'm with Velocity Global. We're an organization, like I said, that helps companies expand internationally without the use of an entity or contractor usage. And so if you think about it, we're a vehicle to hire your people quickly and compliantly in other countries. That'll be important to understand, as some of the content I have is relative to those organizations, many of which are here in Colorado. But thank you again to the speakers. Looking forward to diving more into your content and material. Before I go too deep, I do want to take a minute to thank Toby Armitage, who is the Colorado Companies to Watch Chair-elect and who heads the virtual programming committee. Can't see his face because he is blocked out right now, but much of the content you will be seeing in the days, weeks to come is really led by Toby. And he wanted to put something together that was going to provide value in the form of information to not only the members, but the alumni. So Toby, I know you can hear me, I know you can see me, and thank you so much for putting this together. And we're all excited to be a part of this initial conversation. I look forward to the material to come out later this year. So thanks again. Transitioning into what I've been asked to speak to, because my clients are pretty diverse, being domestic organizations, expanding internationally, they have a bit of a different view as to what they're concentrating on in light of the global epidemic. What I've been asked to do is speak for about 5-10 minutes on what those clients are seeing. And for any of you who know me, 5 to 10 minutes you might not think is possible, but I'm here to do the impossible today, so stay with me. To start, these organizations do range in size. So from everything from your startup organization to your Fortune 500s. And as you can imagine, some companies have placed their hiring initiatives on freeze, but others are continuing to capitalize on today's market. So I want to share some of the lessons learned very briefly and what I'm seeing and what they're paying attention to. The first is centered around talent. I think we can all agree that prior to COVID-19, talent was difficult to obtain and certainly keep. And current market conditions have presented an opportunity for some to secure talent, not just domestically, but internationally as well. I think what they're learning, what we're all learning, is that the remote work environment is productive. We have not seen a dip in productivity. In fact, most companies that have firmed up some cyber risks, built upon their technology platforms, have started to invest in communication platforms like Slack and Zoom. And now they feel comfortable hiring remote employees. Again, that's domestically and internationally. I think we've all had our reservations about what a world would look like if we were working from home, because the initial thought is, would productivity lag? Or do you truly have the attention of your employees? And we're finding out you do. We're finding out productivity continues to go on. So these remote employees are also providing a bit of assistance when it comes to capacity challenges. Speaking of Colorado, this firsthand, we have some commercial challenges. And so what this has done is afforded the ability for companies to stay in their current facilities and allow some employees to continue to work from home and be remote. And whether they're cycling them in and out on a weekly basis, whatever the case may be, they're finding some relief and they're not feeling the pressure of having to secure the next big property, in downtown Denver or on the outskirts. Continuing with this theme of talent, there's been an interesting challenge that's been presented in the way of visa and immigration, especially here in the United States. Some countries like the US are limiting or suspending all visa services and barring all forms of immigration. This is creating a bit of a challenge for our US-based clients because they had potential employees applying for visas. They're no longer able to bring them over to work legally. Many of these individuals are critical to their job function and role within the organizations. And some, in light of this pause, some employees are opting to go back home to be closer to family. So what they're trying to figure out to do is in light of this freeze or entry into the United States, what can they do to continue to work with these people? And we're finding that they're coming to us to act as the vehicle of hiring them, which removes their ultimate concern over retaining these critical employees. Another area that's been certainly a focus is with supply chain management. And I don't have to spend too much time on this because I think you're probably all aware of what's going on with supply chain. You know, companies that are operating in or exposed to countries that are significantly affected by COVID-19 have experienced disruptions to their supply chain and production commitments. Because of this, many are reimagining the supply chain model and working to ensure disruptions at a minimum. Because of that, I've seen an uptick with quality assurance managers being hired internationally. And this is, again, to manage those supply chain risks, whether it's their own facilities or through a third-party manufacturing relationship. They're attempting to diversify the relationship into other countries. So again, if there was another disruption to come, they could at least shift some of the production requirements into other facilities around the globe. And finally, businesses were concerned and are concentrating on coverage. You know, in an effort to keep their businesses moving, they're reevaluating coverage based on global regions. They're doing it here domestically, absolutely, but their focus is how they can limit the impact of revenue internationally. So as one market is adversely affected, the others are still operating. And the example that comes to mind is what happened in the Asian Pacific region when COVID-19 was first impacting the globe. And certainly they were the first to shut down, and to use the ripple effect analogy, the tide hadn't necessarily hit the US yet. But by the time it did, countries like Taiwan and South Korea were bouncing back, while we here in the United States were still managing the curve. So the idea for a lot of clients is if they're able to have a presence in those areas, to use as the example, it ensures that there's some form of business continuity in place. All of this is, again, relative to the risks they see today, but also what they're mindful of disruptions in the future. A lot of this sounds basic in nature, but quite honestly, it's probably lower on the end of your to-do tasks prior to COVID-19. And still, more organizations are being mindful of it. And while I'm certainly heartbroken for the companies that won't bounce back for this, I am encouraged that some are creating new ways to serve their clients via new products, services, or other innovative tactics. Organizations are thinking through the next epidemic or disruption of business and how they can reduce those risks. They are positioning themselves to come out stronger. So for that, I'm truly optimistic. A question that gets posed to me by some of my clients that are backed by venture capital or private equity is, how is this affecting the M&A market? And luckily, Bill, it ties in pretty well to your world. And so what I'll do is turn it over to you, Bill, to talk through how it's affecting the buy side, sell side valuations and so forth. So Bill, why don't you take it from here?
Great. And thanks, Brian. Yeah, there's the myriad of questions that we're asked every day and by our clients or prospective groups that are thinking about either raising debt or thinking about selling their company. What's the world look like today versus versus what it looked like 10 weeks ago? And a lot of people, it's just helpful for us to start by saying, and this is caveated by depending on what industry you're in, the world hasn't stopped, and there are transactions that are in process, and certain things have changed about them, obviously, and for good reason. But the end of the world, if you will, is not upon us. Overall activity, deals are getting done, and we're having more and more conversations, and really depending on the industry that you're in is really going to drive how you're going to be able to pivot or work your way through this. And it is really also dependent on your goals. If you're in oil and gas, or you're in the travel industry, or you're in the restaurant industry, obviously this might be an existential threat to your company, what's happening right now. However, on the other side of things, where there's a lot of pain in certain sectors, there's an enormous amount of exuberance in others. For example, where the stock for Zoom is really quite through the roof, and for this very reason that we're having this panel here now. The other types of industries we are currently representing an ad tech company in the dating space, and they do a lot of online dating and dating apps, and that's kind of the world that they live in. In March, they saw a 30% jump in overall spend. Another group that we're representing, it's a company out of Florida. They're in the gaming space, and they position in ad tech, they position either desktop or mobile advertisements in the gaming industry, and eyeballs are up 400% in online gaming. And so really you've got a tale of of multiple extremes right there, but a lot of companies are going to fall somewhere in the middle. And if you're kind of on the borderline or fringe, maybe it's a case by case basis, depending on what you're hoping to get out of get out of a transaction. Another thing that we're seeing a lot of from an activity perspective are special situations. So in the event that you're about to breach debt covenants because of the virus, or you're being, if you're close to a bankruptcy and you've got serious cash flow issues, special situations, we have a special situations team at Forbes that assists with the equity raise. And there's a lot, you'd be surprised, there's a lot of groups out there that are looking to help companies raise that short-term capital to shore up whatever cash flow need they have. And then, but a lot of this is, a lot of folks want to know from the sell side and thinking about what your business is worth. How has all of this changed? Well, it's beyond really what your overall enterprise value might be today versus what it was. It's really got quite a bit to do with what your tolerance is. The name of the game in getting deals to the finish line right now, or getting them under a letter of intent and having meaningful conversations with investors, is flexibility. And for example, a lot of investors will absolutely insist on having a face-to-face meeting with the target seller or the target company. And that just wasn't happening for the last 8 weeks. And it might be another 4 weeks before people are really comfortable with, getting on an airplane. But I think that what we're hearing and what we're seeing is that deals are moving forward in the spirit of, hey, we'll get to that eventually. And maybe that in-person or face-to-face meeting comes within a couple weeks, 3 weeks of a close. But it doesn't mean that deals can't continue to move forward, because there's a heck of a lot that needs to be done from a diligence perspective and ancillary document negotiation perspectives. So there's a lot that can absolutely continue to move forward, because in some senses time is on our side to let the get further to the back end of the curve and let things settle down, and especially with people's overall comfort in being face to face with folks. So so flexibility. We're also seeing that need for flexibility in terms of letters of intent. We got a company a letter of intent last week, and the buyer insisted that instead of a 60-day lockup to get to closing, they originally asked for 120 days. That was about a month ago, and which we were happy to accommodate because we thought that was an appropriate time frame. And then 2.5, 3 weeks later, they ended up coming back off of that and only asked for 90 days. And so that was just a sign that things were loosening. This was a deal and a transaction that didn't require debt. That was one of the reasons why I was able to move forward so quickly. And the debt markets are also a big part of what's happening in M&A and what's very different right now. The requirement of debt is enormous for leveraged buyout models, an LBO, if you've heard that initialization. And that is the classic and typical way that private equity or institutional investors like to look at deal structure. And LBOs have an enormous amount of debt applied to them because it's a great way for them to juice, if you will, the internal rate of return and the discounted cash flow models, so that their cash on cash equity investment you can maximize it by applying more debt. So as the debt markets have changed and the availability of capital right now is absolutely still iffy, we're hearing and seeing that the amount of debt in deals is overall less. There's the term EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. That's essentially one of the key bottom line ways that banks and investors and lenders, et cetera, look at a deal and a company in terms of its overall health. So in other words, it's a way of characterizing profit. And a lender or an investor will typically apply, pre-COVID, they might have applied, say, 4.5 times EBITDA of debt. And so in other words, if a company is profiting, say, has EBITDA of $1 million, they would put maybe $4.5 million of debt on the transaction in addition to whatever equity they were also going to apply to it. What we're hearing now is that the average dropped. One report was that across all transactions, it dropped from 4 to 3. So that's a full single turn of EBITDA. And as you can imagine, what that means is that buyers, it's not that they don't think a company might be worth more, they can only pay so much because they're only allowed or able to add so much debt to a deal. So I've been talking quite a bit. I'm happy to talk further about other components of M&A and some of the nuances on valuation, but I'll pause there, Brian.
Yeah, no, that's great, Bill. And for everyone listening, I've had the pleasure to catch up with Bill and Heather offline, and we could talk hours on end about their content. But Bill, I'll hold off and maybe reserve some questions towards the end. But to transition over to Heather, you've got a fair amount of ground to cover, but if you wouldn't mind starting, I'm curious what Reentry looks like for employees and what business owners and executives should be mindful of with Reentry regarding those employees. Is it okay if we start there?
You bet. That's perfect.
Great.
I don't mean to be the doomsdayer, but I was included for a dose of reality here. So I just want to set the stage so that everybody understands that we have to be realistic. I know that that's been in the news, lots of politics back and forth, but the truth is from our perspective and based on the science that we know, we are 18 to 24 months out from having a vaccine for the general population. They're really hard to make, and that's despite all the fast tracking and everything else. So if you're in a business today, what would you do to plan in order to make sure that everything continues to go forward during that 18 to 20 month period of time and you don't miss a beat, or you stay alive, or whatever your goal is, increase your efficiencies, maintain your business, merge with another business, go see Bill, right? Whatever your plan is, I don't think that it necessarily has to change in the end goal, but I think that the way in which you're going to get there is going to be a different road. And there needs to be some internal kind of insurance policies or some disaster planning that might keep you in good check. Now, given my background, because I lived and worked in Poland starting when the wall came down, and it was force majeure every day. It was hard, lacking of infrastructure, the banking system didn't work, et cetera. If you could imagine a scenario like that, I think it's useful because then it's only upside when you start to plan from there. In terms of a vaccine and bringing something to market, The estimates for the United States, there are multiple vaccines under development. Again, we're part of 14 out of globally an estimated 100 vaccine developments moving forward. It may eventually involve a 350 million to 700 million dose need, so 1 or 2 shots. But just to give you an idea of how difficult that is, first you have to make the vaccine, and then you have to build the capacity for that vaccine. There are not enough needles and syringes, so consequently we may be an alternative, but everyone is involved in capacity increases. So it's not a doomsday scenario as long as there's suppliers and you realize that the speed of money in the economy is going to continue in certain cases. So I hope that you find yourself in that particular kind of a business. At least for us, we do. Really important to maintain health and welfare of your team. And that may sound like a simple concept, but the coronavirus is a family from, you know, the virus that causes the simple cold. Things like MERS, carried by camels, SARS, carried by civets, are from the corona family. This particular virus comes from the bat family. There has never been a vaccine successfully created for coronavirus because it mutates. So while things have come potentially close, that's part of the reason why we're trying to be conservative around the development of a vaccine. There may be some candidates where the first responders are given the first opportunity to have an immunization, but it's still early days. Staying healthy also includes the concept that if you manifest coronavirus, whether or not you know that or not, because sometimes people don't have symptoms, they're asymptomatic. If you get it again, scientists are worried that your body will have this kind of immune response that's even more robust and actually cause more problems. So just because you feel fine doesn't mean you should go and run a marathon. That's not the healthy I'm talking about. I'm talking about checking vitals. Simple purchase of a pulse oximeter may be helpful. Identifying people who are in key categories with diabetes, some heart distress, circulatory distress. Those individuals are at much greater risk because when the coronavirus invades the body, the immune response is mounted and causes inflammation in those areas, and potentially small aneurysms can happen, or your lungs can start to fill with fluid, and before you know it, you can't breathe. And by the time you recognize that you can't breathe, that's when you should be in the hospital. So again, I don't want to scare people unnecessarily, but the reason why we're all working from home or have this social distancing situation is because we're trying to prevent the spread of the virus. And this virus is highly virulent, meaning it spreads really easily and you can't see it. And that kind of brings me to the next level of discussion, which is that we all share the disease burden. So if there were ever a vaccine, they're estimating 70 to 80% of the world's population will probably experience this coronavirus, COVID-19 situation. But herd immunity means that there are more people that are immunized and consequently we're all healthier. So let's think about flu shots. The CDC always is inspiring flu shots in the fall. So the protective immunity level is generally, if about 65% of the population are healthy, then chances are everyone's pretty healthy. And that's good for business. In this situation, we're trying to make sure that we social distance so that we don't overwhelm the hospitals, because by the time you get to the hospital, you're in really bad shape. But it's still about maintaining some health. So I highly recommend your companies consider flu shots, pneumonia shots, any immunization that affects the circulatory or respiratory system. There's evidence that, as an example, measles may have a positive effect for younger children. There are studies going on in tuberculosis vaccines, which we don't actively use in the United States because they're good for the circulatory and lung system. Next, I want to move into kind of the business planning side, which, using my kind of, again, private equity background in Poland, you know, planning for success, budgetary activities. Can we do without? I witnessed so many people able to build their businesses in a unique sort of a way because they were under-resourced and money was not easy to find. So creatively, what could you do? Are there resource sharing capabilities that help reduce your costs? Are you able to stagger your workforce, even if you have to have some people in the office from time to time, because there are customer serving interfaces? Do you have a key man plan? Do you have redundancy among your employees to make sure that if somebody falls ill or heaven forbid, passes away, that you actually have a plan in place to make sure that business continuity is preserved? I think it's important to recognize too that we all kind of are enjoying Colorado and we're headed into a kind of warm and dry spell. We may see that there is a decrease in the virus circulation because it doesn't like hot and dry, and there's a correlation with vitamin D. So a little bit of dose of sunshine or more vitamin D in your body helps make things better. But I'd like to suggest that just because we're in this wonderful land of Colorado with wide open spaces, it doesn't mean that things won't get worse. So you probably have a 3-month period of time during the summer where your employees don't have kids in school. That's a little less stressful, perhaps, working at home, where you can really make a bigger, better plan to, again, plan for a rainy day, cut your costs, reorganize your business, develop your disaster plans. And hopefully it'll get better, because if you're planning for the worst and it's better, that'll always be important. Next, I'd like to just flag a few little things from our perspective where we've had multiple governments reach into their pockets to help fund initiatives globally, because we're in this scenario where the disease burden is global. There's an estimated $37 billion being allocated by governments to health programs, and that's supporting things like maternal child health, health systems, education, et cetera, because if these systems are not supported, then the infrastructure falls apart, which is what we're all relying on. So I think there will continue to be speed of money in the economy in different places than what we're used to. I heard today on the radio that there's been a 14% increase in the money supply in the United States based on the first initial measures for this virus. So on the positive side, again, speed of money is important so that we can try and have this new normal, but planning for inflationary pressures is really important. So if you're not in a position to increase your prices, are you in a position to reduce your costs, which amounts to basically preserving your margin? I also continue to believe that we will globally collaborate in a different sort of a way, and Bill flagged that sometimes investors need to look you in the eye or they don't feel comfortable. But I think that we're getting used to being able to collaborate without necessarily having to jump on an airplane. So I'll stop with the doomsdays and lessons, and happy to answer questions.
Yeah, why don't we pause there. Kim, is there any questions from everyone that's joining us?
We do not have any questions as of right now. We do have a few questions that I would like to ask. And if you do have questions, please go to the bottom of your screens and click in that share button and feel free to share some of your thoughts. Especially, we'd like to hear from our audience today about what they're seeing in the marketplace, how they are being affected, and some of the solutions that your businesses have come up with, because this is an opportunity for ourselves to share in this knowledge base. But my first question is really for Bill, and then it would actually, I'd like to hear Heather's point of view on this, but knowing that we've had a lot of businesses that are taking advantage of assistance, how is that affecting the preparation for capital raise, or for how companies are looking for preparation of sale?
I'm sorry, you said assistance. Are you referring to PPP?
PPP or EIDL or any of the loan assistance that any of the communities are providing?
Yeah, and that's a question that we're getting quite a bit right now. Clients that we're currently preparing to take to market are saying, hey, I had the question yesterday. One group asked, is this going to make us look weak in the eyes of an investor, or are we going to look poorly, or that we were desperate because we took advantage of the PPP? And it's really in one sense, it's a forgivable loan or a way to get a company through a tough time from a cash flow perspective. And another way of looking at it, if you're going to look at it as a loan, it is very inexpensive money. But in all cases, I would suggest every business owner or CFO or CEO might think about PPP as is it going to give you the ability to ride through this storm and come out on the other side stronger? And for some companies, the PPP it's either turn the lights back on in June or shut the doors forever. So I would suggest that every company is going to be different in that perspective. There's this interesting idea though that because this is such a unique event, because this is really COVID as a one-time event, there absolutely can be and should be a narrative around the performance of a business and how it weathered this storm. So in other words, some businesses might not be affected at all. For example, I had referenced the dating company that the service provider in the dating space that happens to be thriving, and they might not need PPP at all. However, another company that might otherwise be strong might need to take on that slug of cash flow to help them get through this. And there is, as I said, there's a narrative, or there's a discussion that absolutely should that should be and can be, and we very much intend to be having with investors and buyers around this idea that if you think about the growth trajectory of a business, and you're going to have hopefully this generally steady arc upward or line upward, and with COVID it's going to flatten but then pick back up, and we understand that. So your growth might take a hit, your earnings might take a hit, but if you look at the performance of a business all the way up, say, through February 2020, and at some point the business will recover, and if that interruption or downward trend and then uptick again, it's like almost like a Nike swoosh, there is a narrative to help fill in that gap. Somebody had sent a meme, and I described EBITDA as a way of characterizing the profit of a business, but they had this was EBITDAC, so earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and Corona. And so we absolutely intend to have those discussions and conversations, and an investor would understand that. An investor and a buyer would look at that and say, yeah, we get that, and so that's part of the narrative and sort of the understanding of that of why this might not all be doom and gloom in terms of how you're looking at your books. We would suggest that as a business owner, maybe you're thinking about maybe it's 6 months or a year, 18 months, record and understand the immediate impact to your performance. It could be from your average days outstanding on your accounts receivable might go from, say, 45. It might double, it might go to 90, but then come back down. And that's going to be the result of maybe your clients just having a general inability to pay. But then there's going to be that recovery around that. So those types of monitoring and understanding those data sets and being able to speak to them is what we would look for.
Hey, Bill, real quick question for you on the venture capital in private equity organizations. Some of these companies are backed by VC and private equity. Are they sitting on money, or are they reinvesting in some of their portfolio companies and renegotiating kind of a better equity rate or your percentage?
So when all of this happens, so for example, institutional or private equity type investors, they think about their world and they'll divide up their portfolio into very different industry verticals. And it's, as your wealth advisor might always tell you, diversify, right? So you might have a portfolio or a platform investment in healthcare. You might have another platform investment in software as a service or the tech-enabled services, and maybe another platform in manufacturing. What we saw in the last 8 weeks is a lot of private equity groups said, hey, tap the brakes. We don't want to look at anything else right now. We are focused on just making sure all of our portfolio investments have what they need. But and how they're looking at maybe add-on investments, or we call them bolt-ons to those platforms, there is this sense that we may see a full turn of EBITDA lower, or maybe two, and it's going to be very industry dependent, but a softening in the overall valuations of businesses. In terms of how much equity these groups have sitting on the sidelines, it's still absolutely enormous. And as all of that equity and all of that cash came out of the stock market, institutions were pulling a lot of that. We're pulling a lot of those levers and creating more liquidated positions. And in fact, at money market, the cash right now in money markets is at an all-time high. Well, as money flows from, say, the public markets, like the NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange, et cetera, it has every opportunity to move into private institutional or limited partnership type investments, or private equity. And so that money is still sitting on the sidelines, and private equity groups still have the same level of need to deploy that capital. So part of this dynamic of why we had such an amazing sellers market for the better part of 5-6 years. That was one of the big drivers of that. Another one of the big drivers happened to be the debt markets, which are under pressure right now. But the fact that there is still so much capital on the sideline, and groups are trying to deploy that capital where they can, that hasn't changed.
Can I add just a tad to that? Because PharmaJet is in a category of business where we're always raising money. It's the life science med tech space where it takes a long time for things to come to market and become commercial state, and therefore profitable. I'd say that there's going to be pockets of funding, just like bill related, that are always looking for good deals. But if you're in a situation where your business may require some additional financing, I would suggest that you think really creatively. It's about finding the right match of the right money and then the right deal structure. So it may be equity, it may be debt, it may be some recapitalization. But if you have the opportunity to take on funding, whether or not it's PPP funding or otherwise, I think you should continue to keep an open mind, because there are investors searching for deals. There are people not interested in the public markets today, but actually in bona fide assets. And while there will be pockets of things like real estate, which continue to suffer for a variety of reasons on a look-through basis, you still will observe deals being done constantly. And as an example, in the med tech space, there's actually quite a lot of investment activity underway today, because it's the only way that we can innovate and solve some of this current scenario that we're facing right now. Lastly, there are certain areas, like in our space, where antitrust laws have been relaxed, which is a positive thing, because more than ever, we need to have collaboration. So within your various market segments, wherever that may be, you probably should do some investigation, but there could be ways that you could actually collaborate with competitors and make sure that you get your business in a more kind of beneficial position relative to theirs, because I think it's probably the right thing to do, as opposed to it's co-opetition is the word going forward.
That's a really good point, Heather. We've been hearing a lot of when you look at your business to evaluate what is your valuation, what problem are you trying to solve or serve? And then look at who else is in your market that is also trying to help solve and serve. And then is there redundancy, or is there a way to collaborate in order to bring whole industry clusters together to help support and innovate and help keep those industry clusters, viable. We do have a question from one of our attendees here, and this is goes along with our question or our conversation here, is have any accepted practices been proposed, developed, or defined regarding how to approximate and differentiate financial impacts from COVID versus normal operations, especially in context of investor communication?
You know, I think on an accounting basis, you're probably going to find that the standards won't change because that requires you know, almost an act of Congress to change those things. It's periodic legislation. But I think it's perfectly fine to have managerial accounts where you pull out the effects of what you are experiencing. You can create your own statements with appropriate caveats or asterisks or underlying sub-reports. And it's probably the right thing to do from a managerial standpoint. What is this costing you? Are your insurance rates going up? I have a feeling that health insurance, all kinds of insurance rates are going to go up, right? There are going to be certain areas where you'll find that you're getting more productivity out of your workforce by everybody not being in the office. You're going to find that there will be things that will continue on, I think, as a standard practice if you're able to keep these statistics today. And you never know how low you can go until you ask. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody quotes a certain price and you go back and try and renegotiate it, because maybe there's a sharing of a margin in there. It's probably, you know, going to help you be more disciplined, frankly, going forward.
Absolutely. And this question is for Brian. Have you seen any resources or tools that have helped businesses realign, you know, their financials in a way that helps them be more streamlined?
Yeah, you know, there's a number of accounting tools and kind of other professionals I've worked with. I don't think there's one end all be all. It's truly contingent and dependent on what you're looking to do and what you're looking to streamline. I hate to give such a broad response, but that's truly the case. It depends where, again, you're looking for that improvement. So, you know, if I could maybe get a little more specifics, or perhaps, you know, if you want to ping me offline, I can share some insight on what some of my clients have done. That's helpful.
Hey, but Brian, I have a question for you. Can you expand on the immigration shutdown, and what are you hearing in terms of how long that might last? Because I also heard recently there was some suggestion that the H-2B visa program might come back with more robustness to get people, you know, here and to do some of that type of traditional work that workforce was providing. What can you share us with that?
Yeah, Bill, that's a great question. Because we tend to be the ultimate sponsor in country for a lot of these employees we support. We have a global visa and immigration department, and this thing changes daily. I get reports from the head of that division when I'm talking about a particular region or countries. And you're right, I've heard the same thing. I haven't seen anything personally come out on that. It's something I probably reserve for our head of that division. But the countries are weighing, you know, like in the Middle East with the UAE rather, with Dubai, is they put a freeze on net new, what I'm calling net new visas, and kept the renewals in place. You would think we would adapt or adopt some of the same ideas. But I think this thing regionally evolves and changes daily. So again, I hate to stick with the broad comments, but yeah, nothing that I know of today, but ask me tomorrow. I might have something for you.
We have a question for Heather. You said 18 to 24 months to vaccine. Between now and 2022, do you foresee any intermediate state where people are tested for immunity, for example, and are not isolating, and the travel, entertainment, sports industries return to even an intermediate level in the interim?
Well, I'll start out by saying, you know, I'm traditionally an optimist, and I think that the amount of innovation that's being unleashed right now is unprecedented. So I'm very, very optimistic that there's some solutions coming. Most recently, everybody's heard about remdesivir, which is an antibody solution. People who have recovered from coronavirus are contributing their antibodies for more development activities. So we will start to see some intermediate solutions, but those are probably for people who are ill and need to get better. On the preventative health side, unfortunately, the vaccine studies simply take enough of this kind of time and resource to reach a point where they've been proven to be safe. efficacious, how many injections you need. You might need a prime, you might need a boost, you might need another one in 6 months or 12 months. So it's a really complicated answer. And then the capacity scale up in between time takes a long time. So I believe that there will be little glimmers of hope that allow us to start to normalize. And there may well become tests on the antibody side to confirm if you are safe, if you've been exposed and you've developed some immunity. But that caveat there is down, the risk is if you get exposed again, will the symptoms be worse? So I think the jury's still out a little bit on sports and the new normal. Social distancing is helpful, but you know, when you think about the airflow in big venues, I think, you know, liability comes to mind. You know, what's the level of liability that are people willing to accept themselves, or are providers willing to actually disclose and require? Will you go to a venue and on your ticket it says you have to sign on the back to confirm that you accept all your risks and, you know, obligations? It's going to take some more time, and I wish it were a better answer, but I think the next 6 months to 9 months will be hugely pivotal in what the solutions are that we feel like we can rely on for then the perspective kind of 12 to 24 months out.
I have a question for you based on some information I saw with like Wisconsin. You know, their numbers had skyrocketed to well over 200% upon reentry. What should we be mindful of in Colorado in particular if we see those numbers increase? You know, is it a combination of reverting back to work from home and reeling back in, or, you know, the herd immunity as you brought up? Is there some sort of balance we should be looking at? What are your thoughts there?
From our perspective in PharmaJet, we're still at 100% work at home with one person in the office daily to kind of catch the mail and the phones. I think we're going to stay that way for the next number of months because it's working well. And I know not all businesses can do that, but if your business can function that way and you have very important key personnel that you know you need to have consistently be healthy, it's probably the best way for us to proceed. If you do look at these states, where I think it's also Wisconsin, where there was a challenge at the court level about whether or not the state could require that you have to stay home or not. The human nature is that we all want to return back to life, but the truth is that we have to adopt change, and I think we're good at that in Colorado. We're a collaborative state. We're also really interested in health. We're also a highly educated population here. So I'm hopeful that Colorado is going to shine. On the other side, you know, we do have lots of transit if DIA opens up again, or if we think that we're going to normalize the sporting industry. There's 18 million people normally that come to Colorado and get off and stay in Colorado. So we are by no means out of the woods, and I would do everything possible to continue this social distancing as a business in every case, again, that is possible.
I'm so pleased you said that Colorado is collaborative, because we tout that every day. So thank you for doing that. So we just have a few minutes left. I wanted to have our speakers just wrap things up with giving us a few sentences on what is the message that you want our attendees to hear. So Brian, let's go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, I think Bill, Heather, and I talked a little offline about it. Look, this is going to be a bit of a roller coaster. And you have to be active. You have to be proactive. You can't just sit still or stay on the bench. So I think what I'm learning from my clients is, you know, their ability to be creative in the midst of these times and to keep moving forward, but to also understand this is going to be a roller coaster. That's, you know, like Heather said, it's not going to disappear in the next couple months. So what are you preparing to do to kind of offset some of the risk that you might be facing 3 months from now? I am optimistic. You know, like you said, Colorado is very collaborative. So I'll end on my optimism that we, selfishly, you know, maybe be able to bounce back a little bit quicker than the rest of the country.
And Bill?
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, from a 60,000 foot level there, you can dwell, or you can find the positives in all of this, whether some of the nuggets that Heather shared or Brian. We're seeing certain levels of positive momentum in our world from an M&A perspective. But when I think about these discussions and how we get into reentry and how disruptive all of this was, at the same time, and I know this isn't about Colorado or the virus or how we can be, as a panel, can be helpful to folks. I have game night again with my 18 and 16-year-old, and game night's been gone for 5 or 6 years. And so I'm spending really great quality time with my kids that I know that I otherwise would not have. And one of the other things that I wanted to mention is that there's a lot also happening on the debt side, and I spoke specifically about different nuances, and some businesses are better positioned than others. Every business is different. Every industry is different. Depending on what your goals are, if there is a transaction in capital formation where you need to raise debt and your bank is leery, or you can't find a lender that's able to help you with, for example, a manufacturing expansion, that those deals can certainly happen. And your traditional lender might not be able to do the full amount, but there are ways to raise capital. And I think that, as Brian had mentioned, that reaching out to any of us, I'd be happy to answer any specific questions in terms of viability of a business, in terms of even what the valuation might look like today versus what it looked like prior, and what to think about maybe in 12 months or 18 months. And so please just reach out to me through my email, and I'd be happy to help.
And Heather?
Yeah, I think, just from a humanitarian standpoint, trying to always recognize what it's like to be somebody else, put yourself in their shoes, help your fellow man, extend the courtesy and the grace to cut people slack, because life is busier than it's ever been. Kids trying to be in school, working remotely, parents trying to work at home with their kids, or that person that has no safety net. So that's just on an overall basis. Second, I think maintaining, our good humor is important. And, there's a lot of correlation with brain health. If you are hanging around with negative people, everything gets to be black, negative, right? The brain goes with the trend. So being able to celebrate certain things, being able to share, being able to be human, take off your armor and pretend that it's, not so easy is really, really important. And then the last thing is plan for disaster. It's important because if it's better than that, you'll be pleasantly surprised.
I like that. We will now have a new piece in our operations book on how to handle pandemics. So that will come from this. So I appreciate that. And I also appreciate the comment of finding your community and being able to find that positive community that will help you through this. And it is okay to feel frustrated and overwhelmed. And we're hoping that this community will become that for our alumni. I wanted to thank our panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules today. The information you provided is very thought-provoking, and we and have given our leadership a basis in which they can thrive in the current market. We hope that today's information will help kickstart our professionals' innovative instincts. Out of adversity comes opportunity, and we have seen innovation accelerate during our most adverse history. This will be no different. Again, I want to thank all of our sponsors for supporting us today, as well as Bank of America, who is a shining example of really getting out and helping and caring for our business community and helping support CCTW's mission. A big thanks goes out to everyone for joining us on this call today. Please share the insights and questions that you may have after this call, either by emailing us or using our new communications platform, Click. you're interested in the nominations process or becoming a sponsor, please email us at cctw@coloradocompaniestowatch.org. And please help us continue bringing great content by completing the survey that will be in your inboxes shortly. Again, all recordings will be sent out via email to all our attendees today and will be posted on the CCTW's Click channel. Click invitations have gone out to all CCTW membership. If you have not seen it, let us know and we'll get you connected. So stay safe and healthy, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.